Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to be examining some lessons from Isaiah chapter 48. We have seen yesterday in reading the text that this is a message that God gives to the house of Jacob, to the people of Israel. And it's kind of going to be a rather solemn statement. It's not the pure message of hope, which is one of the things that we've been focusing in on for the last little while in the things that God has said about who He is and those kinds of things. This is actually a bit of a forlorn message that God is going to lay out for the people of Israel. And I want you to notice three things from this particular chapter. As we've said throughout, I'm not going to be touching on everything. I'm certainly not going to deal with every lesson that we can pull from it. But these are three things that kind of stuck out to me as I examined the passage. The first one is found in verses 3 through 5, where there he says, "The former things I declared of old. They went out from my mouth, and I announced them. Then suddenly I did them, and they came to pass. Because I know that you are obstinate, and your neck is as iron sinew, and your forehead brass. I declared them to you from of old, before they came to pass. I announced them to you, lest you should say, My idol did them, my carved image and my metal image commanded them." God says, I told you beforehand about things that were going to happen. I told you about things that were going to transpire, and then I did them. I told you that I would do certain things if you did this, and then I enacted them. And I did that because I know that you are obstinate. I know that you're hard-headed or stiff-necked. I know that you are ones who have forgotten the things that I have said. You know, there are many places where God tells us what it is He is going to do, where God lets us know ahead of time what will be the consequences for our actions if we don't obey, but also what will be the praises and the rewards if we do obey. And God has told the children of Israel many times. You think back to the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy and even throughout the books of the Kings of the times that God has said what it is that He will do if they obey and what it is that He will do if they disobey. And yet Israel doesn't like to listen. They are hard-headed. And so God says, I did what I said I was going to do. And I declared them to you so that you couldn't say that it was your idols or that it was some other nation's gods or things of that nature. I made sure that you knew from the very beginning that it was me. You see here the message of prophecy by God, but you also see the message of fulfilled promise, that God does what He says He is going to do. Then in the second place, you come down to verses 9 through 11. And here God says, "For my name's sake I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. For my sake, for my own sake, I do it, for how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another." God says, for my name's sake, speaking of his name before the people and the promises that He has made and all of those different things, I defer my anger. He says, I am willing to set my anger aside and not give the full weight of it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be at all brought before them, but rather it is the promise, as He puts it in verse 9, to restrain it, to keep it under control, because He doesn't want to completely cut them off due to the promises that He has made. Promises like to David and promises to Abraham and various others along the way. And yet it's not going to be easy for Him to do. He says, because I have refined you, I have shaped you and molded you, but not like silver. Instead, I have had to try you in the furnace of affliction. Because of the choices that they have made, because of the selections that they have made and the directions that they're taking their lives, the furnace that has had to be used is not the furnace of refinement from the standpoint of making things better, but rather the furnace of affliction. And he says, for my own sake, for the sake of his righteousness, for the sake of his justice, I do it. For how should my name be profaned? How can I let people misuse and abuse my name without response, without being willing to follow through with what I have said I will do? He says, my glory I will not give to somebody else. So we see here God saying, I will restrain my anger, but I'm not going to hold it back completely, because there must be a response for the actions of Israel, and I cannot let it go unpunished. You see the response of God to the people of Israel not being willing to truly keep his commands, not being willing to truly follow through. They'll acknowledge God and they'll recognize his existence, but they won't obey him. They will not be his people. And God is going to have to respond to that. The final thing I wanted to point out comes from the final verse, verse 22. He says, there is no peace, says the Lord, for the wicked. This is simply a statement of fact. It isn't a hypothetical. It's not asked as a question, is there any peace for the wicked? But rather it is just simply a statement of fact. Because God has talked about the things that he would do, the things that they could have if they would be obedient to him, and yet they will not be. The things that God doesn't want to do to the people, but he has to because of his righteousness and justice and the promises that he has made and who he is. But then he closes out the chapter by saying, there is no peace for the wicked. The wicked might think that they have peace now. They might think that things are going swimmingly for the moment, but ultimately, there is no peace because of the judgment and the righteousness of God. The same holds true today as it was then. For those who insist upon wickedness, for those who insist upon going against the law of God and the things of his commandments, ultimately, there is no peace. There can be no peace because there is no righteousness. Those are some of the things that I pulled out of chapter 48. I hope that they are beneficial to you. Lord willing, we will come back tomorrow and examine chapter 49. Until then, have a nice day.